They didn't do anything wrong. That's what makes it so hard to explain. They were kind. They were consistent. They showed up. They remembered things you'd only mentioned once. They asked the right questions and actually waited for the real answer. They were, by any reasonable measure, exactly the kind of person you claimed you wanted. And somewhere around the point where they started to actually see you. Not the version you perform in social contexts, not the carefully managed presentation, but the real, complicated, contradictory, hard-to-hold version of you, you started disappearing. Slowly at first. A little more distance. A slightly longer response time. A reason you couldn't make it this week. An edge in your voice that wasn't there 6 months ago. A growing list of low-level criticisms about them that didn't bother you before but now feel significant. They noticed. Maybe they asked about it. Maybe they gave you space. Either way, the outcome was the same. You moved further away from someone who had gotten too close. And the worst part isn't that it happened. The worst part is that it's happened before. Different person. Same arc, same distance, created by you, at the exact moment when the relationship was becoming something real. You don't fully understand why. You don't have a name for what you're protecting yourself from. You just know that something in you pulls back when someone gets close enough to see you clearly. This is what this video is about. Before we go into the mechanisms, here's the frame. What you're about to hear is not a portrait of someone who doesn't want connection. It is a portrait of someone whose nervous system learned, at some point, a very specific and very logical equation. The more someone sees of you, the more there is for them to eventually reject. Visibility is not neutral for a mind that was built in conditions where being fully known led to being found lacking. So every mechanism in this video is a protection strategy. Not a flaw. Not a failure. A solution your mind arrived at, probably long ago, for a very real problem. The fact that those solutions are now costing you something you genuinely want does not make them irrational. It makes them outdated. There are 10 mechanisms inside this pattern. Understanding them changes what you do next. Psychologists call this proximity threat escalation, the process by which a relationship becoming closer feels not just vulnerable but actively dangerous to the nervous system. For most people, closeness is a gradient. The more you know someone, the safer the relationship feels. For you, that gradient reverses at a certain point. Early connection is fine. Interesting even. You like people. You enjoy that initial phase where you're learning each other and everything is still new. But somewhere past that phase, when the person has accumulated enough knowledge of you that they could really hurt you if they chose to, something in your system registers that as threat rather than safety. The logic is airtight from the inside. The more someone knows, the more damage they can do. The more real the relationship, the more real the eventual loss. So the safest move is to start engineering distance before they can decide to create it first. It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like clarity. Like you're just being realistic. The escalation treats depth as exposure. The cost keeps you permanently safe and permanently alone. Psychologists call this visibility lag anxiety. The delayed dread that follows genuine moments of being seen, where the immediate feeling of connection gives way to a rising internal alarm about what you just revealed. You know this feeling. You have a conversation that's actually good. Real. You said something honest. Something you rarely say out loud. They responded in a way that made it clear they understood. And in the moment, it felt good. Right. Like exactly what connection is supposed to feel like. Then sometime in the hours after, or the next morning, or 2 days later, it starts. A quiet discomfort about how much you shared. A review of the conversation. Looking for the moment you went too far. A calculation of how that information could be used against you. Not a certainty that it will be. Just a persistent awareness that it could be. And the person who made you feel seen is now, without doing anything, slightly associated with danger. You become cooler. More careful. You pull back not because they hurt you but because the exposure itself starts to feel like a liability. The lag hits after the warmth fades. The cost. You train yourself to associate intimacy with dread. Psychologists call this known quantity fear, the specific anxiety of being understood well enough by another person that they can predict you, and the loss of control that implies. There's a version of yourself that you manage carefully. In most relationships you have a lot of control over what gets seen and when. You decide what to share. You decide how to frame it. You decide when to deflect. But someone who has been close to you for long enough starts to see around the edges of your management. They know when you're performing. They know when you're actually fine versus when you're saying you're fine. They know the tells. And something about being that knowable, that readable, that mapped, feels deeply unsafe. Not because they do something harmful with that knowledge, but because your sense of safety has always partly rested on being somewhat opaque. Being unknown is being unassailable. Once someone knows you, you can no longer control the version of you that exists in their mind. You're theirs, in a way. And that feels like a kind of vulnerability you never consented to. The fear reads being known as being exposed. The cost. You dismantle every relationship that earns real knowledge of you. Psychologists call this first move preemption, the unconscious strategy of introducing distance or conflict before the other person has any chance to pull away, so you remain the one with agency in the relationship's ending. You've done this. Not consciously. Not with malice. But there are relationships you ended, or damaged, at the exact point where losing them would have hurt the most. Some part of you reads the stakes accurately. This one matters. Which means losing this one would be devastating. Which means you need to be the one who creates the distance before they do. So you manufacture reasons. You pick fights about things that wouldn't have bothered you 6 months ago. You reinterpret their behavior through the most negative possible lens. You start to construct a case for why they were always going to hurt you, why this was always going to end, why you were foolish to let it get this far. And then you act on the case. You create the ending you were afraid of, but you create it first, which means you get to survive it on your own terms. The preemption controls the ending. The cost. You enact every abandonment you were afraid of, from the inside. Psychologists call this self-disclosure regret, the pattern of genuine self-disclosure followed by immediate internal reversal, where what you shared is mentally reframed as weakness, oversharing, or error the moment it lands. You said something true. Something real. You let them see a part of you that usually stays inside. And it felt okay in the moment, or maybe even necessary. But then very quickly it starts to feel wrong. Like you handed someone a weapon without thinking. Like you were weak when you should have been guarded. The self-criticism isn't directed at them. It's directed at you. Why did I say that? What was I thinking? That was too much. They'll think less of me now. I should have kept that private. And you start to compensate. You become more controlled, more performative, more careful in subsequent interactions. You pull the temperature of the relationship back down towards something manageable. Because the warmth that allowed you to share that much has now been retrospectively reframed as a lapse in judgment. The regret reframes honesty as error. The cost. Your most real moments become the very things you withdraw from. Here is the thing nobody says about this pattern. You are not afraid of being left. Not exactly. What you are actually afraid of is the specific experience of having been fully seen by someone and then losing them. Those are two different fears with two very different weights. People who are simply afraid of abandonment can manage it with reassurance. You can't manage it with reassurance, because the threat isn't really about what they'll do. It's about what will be true about you in the aftermath. If someone who barely knows you leaves, you can tell yourself it had nothing to do with the real you. If someone who has watched you closely, known your patterns, seen your worst habits and your private fears, and had access to all the evidence. If that person leaves, the story you tell yourself is different. It means, they saw all of it and decided it wasn't enough. That is the unbearable version. Not, I was abandoned. But, I was fully witnessed and found lacking. That's what you've been engineering your entire relational life to avoid. Psychologists call this witness weight, the disproportionate significance placed on the opinions of people who have enough knowledge of you to truly assess you, making their proximity feel more threatening than the proximity of strangers. A stranger's opinion of you matters very little. You know they're working from incomplete data. But someone who has been paying close attention to you for a year, who has seen you under pressure, seen you be selfish, seen you struggle, seen you contradict yourself, seen your patterns, their opinion is terrifyingly credible. You can't dismiss it the way you can dismiss a stranger's. You can't say, they don't know the whole story. They do. Or they know enough. So the more someone earns real knowledge of you, the more weight their eventual judgment carries. And you can feel that weight increasing in real time. Every good conversation adds to it. Every honest disclosure adds to it. Every moment of genuine closeness is another piece of evidence in a case that might one day be used against you. So your system starts looking for exits. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because their potential verdict is becoming too important to risk hearing. The weight scales with knowledge. The cost The people best positioned to truly love you are also the people you are most desperate to get away from. Psychologists call this intimacy ceiling, the internal threshold past which the nervous system refuses to allow a relationship to deepen, enforced through behavioral withdrawal, manufactured conflict, or emotional flatness. You have this ceiling. You might not know exactly where it is until you hit it. But there's a level of closeness past which something in you shuts down. Not dramatically. Not always visibly. But you stop initiating. You stop sharing new things. You become pleasant and present but no longer generative. No longer bringing more of yourself into the relationship. You've plateaued. And the other person feels it before they can articulate it. The warmth is still technically there but something essential has been removed. The relationship continues existing but has stopped growing. Some people accept this. Some push against it. Some eventually leave. And when they leave, you feel simultaneously devastated and unsurprised. Because some part of you installed the ceiling that caused it. The ceiling enforces a maximum intimacy set point. The cost: every deep relationship stalls at exactly the same altitude. Psychologists call this care suspicion, the reflexive distrust of consistent genuine care from another person, where their reliability becomes evidence not of safety but of hidden motive or eventual withdrawal. This one is subtle but it might be the most corrosive. When someone shows up for you repeatedly, without obvious self-interest, without dramatic conditions, just consistently, you don't feel relieved. You feel suspicious. Not always consciously. But something in you is waiting for the catch. For the moment when this level of care gets withdrawn. For what they're going to want in return that you can't give. For the version of events where this consistency was actually a setup. Because you've learned, probably from something real, probably from a long time ago, that this level of attention doesn't persist. That people who seem to want to know you eventually stop wanting to. So when someone stays, you don't update your model. You assume the data is incomplete. You assume the withdrawal is coming, you just haven't seen it yet. And you begin to detach in advance. Not out of malice. Out of what feels, from the inside, like basic emotional self-management. The suspicion treats reliability as a red flag. The cost: you are least able to receive care from the people most willing to give it. Psychologists call this relational self-erasure, the gradual disappearance of your most authentic self inside close relationships, where the pressure to be consistently knowable drives you to present smaller, safer, more predictable versions of yourself over time. This is the mechanism people talk about least, because it's the one that looks most like a problem with the relationship rather than a problem with the pattern. The relationship was good. You were yourself in the beginning. But as it deepened, as the stakes rose, as being fully known started to feel too risky, you started to edit. The complicated opinions became smaller. The stranger thoughts stayed interior. The parts of you that don't easily translate into an acceptable version, the parts that might confuse them or disappoint them or require explanation, those parts went underground. And you became easier to be around, maybe. But you became less you. And then you started resenting the relationship. Not for anything they did. But because you have to be a simplified version of yourself inside it. You started pulling away from someone who loves a version of you that doesn't fully exist. And you can't explain that without explaining the whole architecture. The erasure makes the relationship feel like a cage. The cost: you leave people who loved you without ever letting them meet you. Now look at all 10 together. Proximity threat escalation. Visibility lag anxiety. Known quantity fear. First move preemption. Self-disclosure regret. Witness weight. Intimacy ceiling. Care suspicion. Relational self-erasure. And underneath all of them, the same architectural belief, installed early and never formally revised. Being fully seen is not the goal of a relationship. It is the risk you take at your own peril. Every mechanism in this list is that belief doing its job. And that belief made sense once. For most people who carry this pattern, it was constructed in conditions where it was accurate. Where the people who knew you best did hurt you most. Where visibility did lead to rejection, or control, or being used as a resource rather than seen as a person. Your nervous system learned the lesson it was meant to learn. It kept you safe. The question is only whether the lesson is still applicable, or whether you've been running a protection system calibrated for a past environment in a present that might finally be different. Here is the precise shift this video is pointing toward. The problem is not that you push people away. The problem is that you experience depth of knowing as magnitude of threat rather than magnitude of safety. And that equation was not born in you. It was written into you by specific experiences in specific relationships at a time when you didn't have the cognitive or emotional resources to write a different one. That means it is not permanent. It means you can, slowly, in real situations with real people, start accumulating counter-evidence. Not by forcing yourself to be more open. Not by deciding to trust people you don't actually trust. But by noticing carefully what you do when closeness arrives, and asking a question that is harder than it sounds. Is this response appropriate to this person in this moment, or is it a response imported from a relationship that ended years ago? That question is not easy. The architecture runs fast. Faster than thought. The pull toward distance will feel like common sense, like clarity, like you're simply being realistic about how relationships work. It will feel like self-protection. And it is self-protection. Just not from anything that is currently threatening you. The work is not to stop protecting. The work is to update what you're protecting yourself from. And that happens incrementally. It happens the first time someone says something honest about your pattern and you manage to stay in the room. It happens the first time you notice yourself pulling back and you name it out loud to the person instead of just doing it. It happens the first time you let someone see something true about you, feel the familiar post-disclosure dread, and then wait, and notice that nothing bad happened. Every single one of those moments is a data point. And over time, data points change equations. There's one more thing. The people you've pushed away. The ones who knew you well and kept showing up anyway and eventually ran out of ways to reach you. Some of them left not because they found you lacking, but because they ran out of space to stay in. They were not the verdict you were afraid of. They were, in many cases, the thing you needed most, and the thing your system worked hardest to eliminate. Knowing that is painful. But it is also information. Because it means the threat you were protecting yourself from was not the relationship. The threat was inside you. And that's the only kind of threat you can actually do something about. If this video described a pattern you've been carrying so long it feels like personality, it isn't personality. It's a strategy. Strategies can be updated. Not instantly. Not without discomfort. But with the right language, the right frame, and enough small experiments in enough real relationships, the equation can change. If you want more of this, not advice, not reassurance, just precise language for how a certain kind of mind operates, you know where to find it. Subscribe if these words feel like the ones you've been looking for. Being known is not what ends things. It is what you've been waiting for long enough to start to deserve.